Back in the workshop, and this week I'm taking as much time off as possible. It's been a bit hectic recently, so I think I've earned a few days off, or at least a few half days. I'm going to try and get at least 4 in this week, and by the end of this week I want to be starting to move stuff out of here and into the 300 and taking the 300 off the road. In order to do that, we've got to sort out plumbing, we've got to sort out wiring, got to redo my high voltage junction box, and then that's kind of it actually. Then it can all go across into the other car, and maybe, definitely not by the end of the week, but maybe next week we can actually get these 300 back on the road with its bigger motor and its much better laid out engine bay. That's the hope anyway. Got some new parts to fit for the plumbing, starting with our new radiator. This is a big upgrade in terms of size on what we had already, possibly overkill, but I don't know how much heat the new motor is going to generate. The old motor was oil cooled, had its own cooling loop. The new one's water cooled, so it's going to go on the same loop as the inverter and the charger. It doesn't have a filler cap unlike the old radiator, so we've also got a nice shiny, albeit cheap and cheerful, header tank, whatever you want to call it. This will sit up top in the engine bay somewhere over here, and this will mount at the front. Now we're not actually going to mount the radiator yet because it will require some trimming and tweaking and welding on this front slam panel, whatever you want to call it, and I only want to do that on the car it's actually going to fit on, which will be the 300 when we take it off the road. But we can actually at least mock it up, work out where it's going to go and work out where the pipes are going to go, and then work from there. From our radiator, water's going to go through the slam panel, or pipes going to go through the slam panel, up into the charger here. This won't be the pipe we use. I don't suspect it'll be a sort of a sharp angle here to bring it out in this direction, then down, and then into the radiator. It'll come out of the charger and DC to DC converter over here, go through a right angle. At some point we've got to put a pump in this side, I think. We could put the pump on the other side, we'll see. We'll come out of here into the inverter, and somewhere on that loop as well there'll be a T-junction for the header tank. The header tank does have pressure relief, so should things get a bit toasty, that'll be our release. Water comes out of the inverter here, goes down to the motor down here, and then out of the motor, the other connections right next to it. Again, I'll take those connectors off. It'll come back down under the battery box, over to here, and then up and into the back of the radiator here. We could also actually quite easily come down the side of the high voltage junction box, and that might actually not be a bad idea. That might also be a suitable place for mounting a pump. Got to remember the pumps take things through 90 degrees, so anywhere you've got a 90-degree junction and enough space to put one is a good place to put a pump. So yeah, that's the rough plan. Still got some details to work out, where the pumps go, how the pumps are mounted, and then we'll look at our box of bits and see what I've got that might start to make up the right angles in terms of making all these connections, and that's the next step. But first, we'll take this slam panel off, get the high voltage junction box out of the way so we've got as much space as possible, and then we can start experimenting. All a bit of a mess, but this is a selection of hose bits basically, some that have come off Outlander parts that I've bought for this project, some that have come off the BMW, some that are trimming off bits that I bought from building the 300. So we've got a variety of sizes, 16mm/5/8, so actually that's actually 19mm, that's 19mm. There are some 16mm internal diameter bits here, which I think is what most of the connectors on the Outlander are. Some it's a straight pipe here and there, lots of Some 3D printed right angles, which I try not to use. They were just mostly for mocking up, and then some bought ones which have got higher temperature resistance. Some smaller ones for vacuum hose as well. A giant pump from a later BMW. Probably not going to use that because to get down to the 19 or 16 mil, I've had to come up with a 3D printed adapter, which I'm not 100% confident in yet. Spare pumps and things. This one attached to a AC heater that I modified for DC, but haven't actually got around to using because I'd have to make a control board with a IGBT or something to drive it, and you know, slightly worried about fire. And now that I've got the Outlander heater, no need. And then a load of spring clips and Jubilee clips of various types, some good, some not so good. Some solenoid valves that I don't really need, various bits and bobs. Anyway, next step is to try and match some of these up to the gaps on the car. Bit of a snafu. I don't know how, because I've installed one of these before, but all the time I was mocking up, I had the Outlander charger upside down, so that, and I don't know if this matters for cooling purposes, I suspect it doesn't, but it means that I couldn't access the high voltage connections very easily. I've made a right mess of this. This was quite nice when I got it. I need to straighten that plate out of it and probably give it a coat of paint or something. I mean, I don't, but I could. If I now put this in the orientation that makes most sense from a connections point of view, so our battery connection up here towards the switch side of live, our low voltage connection where it doesn't really matter, and our charger connection out the front here, because our charger is probably going to be out the front just for the time being, then we just can't access our coolant connections, and this one comes off at an awkward angle. So instead, I shall have to rotate this and work out something with the electrical connections. Now that that's in the right orientation, you can see that our battery cables, well, do you know what? We can just run those up that gap and tuck them in at the back there. That works kind of fine. Our DC to DC converter charging cable will need to run on the same path, and then out here and probably tie into this sort of jump point here, which I'd like to make a proper cover for this time. But we just need a long, you know, thick, I'm not quite sure what gauge, but a long, fairly thick piece of high amperage cable anyway, to run up there into the 12 volt connection. Our heater hose or coolant hose can come off here at a 90 degree and drop down through there and probably down to the pump, which can sit coming off the bottom of the radiator, so that it's got a constant flow of water. And then our charger connections are here, and yeah, we can run those in a variety of ways. I'm not too worried about that. So it's not quite as neat as it was. Everything worked out really neatly before, but I do need to be able to get to these, take this plate off to connect and disconnect these high voltage connections, so I don't really want to mount it the other way up. So yeah, not ideal, but sorted. So this piece actually works quite nicely. It's a bit loose. Need a good clamp on that to come round from that side piece and drop down the front with an elbow in it. I've ordered some 16mm elbows, Although I might leave the 90mm on, it works fine. Obviously the inner diameter of that's going to be more like 16 anyway. That'll drop straight down to the radiator, the bottom connection, the lower connection of the radiator. And then at the back here, this angle piece comes off and up. And I think we might put our pump in here, actually have it more sort of straight like that, nicely mounted. Can mount off these two parts, these two connections from the charger here. Just build a nice little bracket to hold that, maybe off, tie it into there as well, we'll see. And then we'll have this angle and then a joint and then a straight piece coming into it. And to ensure that that pump is always well supplied with water, we'll actually put our T-piece in here from the, so we'll cut this piece off about here rather than having this right angle. We'll put a T-piece in and want the side coming straight out. We'll go to our reservoir up here and then the top side will go through a short piece of 16mm and into our pump in there. So our pump will always be well supplied. It'll mean that our reservoir will always be the highest point. So we should be able to bleed from there with a bit of luck. It means that our inverter, which is kind of the most critical bit, is always going to get good water flow. And then it will drop down from there, down through. I think that works. Some of you may be screaming at the screen now saying that's not going to work, Tom. If you're thinking that, please do let me know. Turns out the barbs on the radiator I ordered are actually more like 1 inch. Fortunately, if we're willing to reuse some slightly older pipes, BMW provides us with nice little hose adapters. So I've got 3 in different shapes, which have got this wider flare on the end and come down to a 19mm, or actually even a 16mm in this case. So I can easily adapt into our 16mm tubing one way or another. Let's get the slam panel on and get this mocked up and work out roughly where our pipes are going to go. That's roughly where the radiator is going to go. I'd obviously like to move it up a little bit, but that would mean trimming out some sheet metal from around the bonnet latch, and I've not yet worked out the arrangement of the bonnet latch with the Z300. I've got some bits to bolt in up there. I need to do some research on that as to whether this is still used. I suspect it is. Got our locking pins coming there and there, but whether this bit is still used, I don't know. Maybe not actually, in which case trimming away some sheet metal here and here. We only really need to bend this out a bit so that it's straight. Maybe take a line up there and plate over there. That wouldn't be bad actually. Doesn't actually, with a slight shuffle to the left. That would allow that to come up a little bit, which would be nice. We can do that when we've got the 300 out though. And then in terms of the pipes, you can see they come over that rear piece at the top. So it will come out here, and then I think actually looking at the routing of this straight pipe, we'll have to put an elbow in here, come up and over the battery box connection, which is not ideal actually. Maybe you want to go under there, or maybe you want to trim so that it can just come round the side. Or do you know what, actually, that radiator mount won't be there, so it can go underneath and then straight up and in here. If there was going to be a second pump, that wouldn't be a bad place to put it, just to make sure that there's enough force to pull the water through and out into the radiator. I might put an auxiliary pump there, just a little Bosch one. That thing, that would fit quite neatly there actually. Just pulling water in. That's not a bad idea. Fortunately, we don't need any of these connection points for the layout of this high voltage junction box, because things are actually going to come straight up from the battery box into here, so no live wires are going to be exposed until 12 volts is on, and even then they're only going to be really short because they're just going to go there to there. That is until our rear pack is in. So quite happy with that. The only problem is if we move the radiator up, then that pipe's going to foul here, unless we move it up enough that it tucks through that hole. And where it is at the moment, everything can just go fairly straight. So maybe we leave it where it is actually, and we don't modify the slam panel at all, other than to add some mounts. And we can just keep it all nice and simple. So from there, we'll just go straight out, 90 degrees, up to here. You can actually see our 90 there. Just go straight down to the radiator, and then our pump here will pull the water through, and our pump here will make sure that it's all getting pulled through at the end and refilling the radiator. And of course our reservoir over here will make sure that the main pumps got a good supply. I think that works. A full 10 points to everyone who realised that I had the radiator upside down while I was mocking up, which means, because obviously these have to be at the bottom, and the drain plug more importantly has to be at the bottom. Which means, look at this, I've kept this in a box really carefully. I've still got lots of bent fins. Which means that I am going to have to relieve some of this metal, particularly on this side actually, in order to make it fit. I've just been looking at the bonnet, and the locking catch doesn't really come much below this point, so all this doesn't need to stick out as far as it does. So I can trim that back and just trim it back and sort of plate it at a right angle to create some space. I'm also probably going to lop some of this off, which I don't think is needed, and will look a bit neater. It'll look like this radiator is actually meant to fit if I do that. Obviously not going to do it on this one, I'm going to do it on the one off the 300 when I take that apart and get all this in there. Other than that though, pretty happy with the plumbing. Got some brackets to make up that I can't make up on this car until I take the other car apart. Waiting on some hose, which is fine. But I feel like I know how it's all going to go now. That'll do for this episode. Made some good progress. I feel like I know now that when I take the Z300 off the road, what I'm going to do with all the plumbing. The parts I'm missing are on order. Got a couple of little brackets to make, but nothing serious. It's relatively straightforward. It's certainly a lot less convoluted than the plumbing is now, even though there's an extra part, the motor, to go in there. I'm very, very glad that we can take all the oil cooling out of the system this time around. So I hope you found that useful. Hope you found that interesting, a little bit fun. Thanks for watching. If you do enjoy this stuff, please do like and subscribe and hit that bell so you get notifications when new episodes pop up. Thanks for watching.